Hello and welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast number 273. My name is John. Joining me again, as always, is Ryan. What's up, Ryan?
Good morning.
I'm noticing at least a little bit of a set change for you, I think. Did you bring in a production designer and do like a different setup there?
Well, what's happened is I have basically across my office multiple screens, devices, whatever. I was formerly like down that way a bit using my Mac to do our recording, which is over there. But I moved to my PC, which is here, just because management of cables and everything and such was just easier having everything in one place. And so yeah, I'm moved a little bit, and so you can see my shelves full of Sega Genesis games behind me.
Do you hear Yoshi in the background of my recording or no? Because he was nowhere to be found for the last 20 minutes while I was getting set up down here. And the second I said hello and welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast, he appeared and started making noise. So there he is.
Oh yeah, okay, our third guest.
Yeah.
Third host.
Okay. I was going to say, I guess we can't claim to be an all Mac podcast anymore. That was one of our calling cards. You know, I think we were known for that, but now we're a little more equal opportunity, I suppose. So.
Yeah, and when you're recording from a web browser, it really doesn't matter what type of computer you're using.
Oh, well, that's what you think. Okay. Yeah, and I see you have is that a Sega Genesis box behind you? Is that the Sonic Sega Genesis bundle that's on the...
It is.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's pretty sweet.
First console I ever bought.
Nice.
With my own money.
Are there any Star Wars games on the Sega Genesis? I feel like there's not. I mean, on the
Not on the
32X and
Genesis.
Sega CD, but...
Yep, 32X has Star Wars Arcade, Sega CD is Rebel Assault, and Star Wars Chess. But
yes.
yeah, big drought on the Genesis when it comes to Star Wars games.
Cool. Well, maybe someday we'll do an episode about the reasons for the drought of Star Wars games on Sega Genesis. I don't know, Mega Drive. Today, we're going to do an episode about Skeleton Crew episodes 1 and 2. So we're going to talk about our reactions to the episodes and just the show overall. And excited to do it. I mean, I think every other Star Wars podcast that exists released their Skeleton Crew episode like 4 days ago, 5 days ago. So we're a little late to the party, but that's just how it's going to be. So here we are.
In the grand
Ryan,
scheme of things, it does not matter.
It's true. It's true.
The
Ryan,
overall river of time.
very good. Yes, absolutely. It is a flat circle anyway. Ryan, I am happy that you're here today to do this podcast with me, because when we last spoke, we weren't sure if you were going to watch Skeleton Crew, and we were far from sure you were going to react well to Skeleton Crew. So let's open up the show here. Can you share how you feel about the show, especially knowing you were going in kind of skeptical?
Yeah, no, I was going into it extremely skeptical, but trying to have as open of a mind as possible. But, you know, on paper, hey, it's Star Wars, but it's, Amblin, is not very appealing to me, and I don't think it's very inspired or original or interesting. However, when I actually sat down to watch the show, that stuff kind of fell by the wayside. Like, the first, 15 minutes of the first episode are, exhausting as they hit, every single, Amblin trope throughout. And then the show, really kind of comes into its own and starts to have its own identity. It almost feels like the the Amblin stuff was like a Trojan horse for this, like the real show. And the real show I found really entertaining. There's, I think the strongest aspect is there's like a mystery at the core of it that's very subtly and smartly introduced, and that's very compelling to me. And I think the show is just undeniably well constructed. It looks great. The performances are great. It kind of, there's kind of an aspect of Star Wars where children acting isn't always the greatest, and this show, much like Obi-Wan, kind of definitely bucks that trend, which is important because the children are carrying the story, and if they sucked, it would be just painful to watch. But they're great, and it's just an undeniably well crafted, perfectly crafted show. Like it just hits every beat. Again, the pacing is incredible. The episodes are just over before you know it. Nothing drags. Everything feels intentional. It's just a masterclass in television storytelling. Even if there are some like aspects of it I don't care as much for that we'll get into, but yeah, it's undeniably a well constructed show.
Wow. Well, that's great to hear. I think that's even a more of a positive response than I expected from our kind of text message conversations and stuff like that. So that's awesome. Yeah, I feel largely the same way. I really loved both episodes. We went to see them at the theater on Monday night, which was pretty fun and a great experience. And it was cool to watch it with a room full of people. And everybody there seemed to get a kick out of it. I took both my kids. My older son was like, it was okay, but I'm definitely not watching any more episodes of the show. But my younger son was definitely into it. So yeah, Elliot was into it. So I'm looking forward to that. Owen's tough.
That's interesting. I was wondering about the Owen review.
He's a tough customer. He really, he's like, I'll watch Andor season 2, but I really had to work hard on him to get him to watch Andor season 1 because we watched the first 2 episodes like the night that they released them, and he was like, nah, this is not for me. And then it was like a year later, after me going on and on constantly for like a year being like, this is the best television show ever made, like I finally got him to watch it again, and he was begrudgingly like, yeah, it's good. He still, I don't think he like loves it, but anyway, this one, not quite for him, so that's okay. Maybe he'll return to it at some point in the future, but when he's older or something. But I think right now he's watching. Yeah. He was watching
when he's in his 40s.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, but he's like,
that's kind of who the show is for.
Yeah, but it's funny because he's 15 and he spends all of his time watching movies on the Criterion Channel, and like he's watching like all these foreign films, and he watched Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator last night. And I'm 42, and I'm like, let's watch this show about these kids on an adventure. So you never know. Like there's supposed target audiences, and then there's reality, right? So it is what it is. But yeah, I loved it. I don't want to push back too much on the whole not as Amblin as you thought kind of thing that you said, because it seems like that made the show work for you, and that's good. But you'd mentioned the kids and the performances being really great, which I totally agree with. I think that's a super critical aspect of the show. Without those great performances from those kids, the show falls apart. It's not going to work. But I'll just say that as far as like the Amblin stuff goes, Goonies, and the other like the Spielberg Amblin movies from the 80s and all that kind of stuff, like it's the kids, and it's the relationship we as an audience have with those kids and the way we feel about those kids, and that makes those movies work too. And so yeah, I guess like the maybe some of the more heavy-handed, kind of homage to Amblin stuff is kind of that's front loaded. But to me, it
Mm-hmm.
does have that Amblin feeling. I thought both episodes throughout because it's centered on these kids. The the sort of way the kids interact with each other feels really good and really, I don't know if real is the right word, but it feels
Mm.
it gives me the same kind of warm sort of feeling and attachment to these young characters that I get, watching like E.T. or The Goonies or, I don't want to say a bad word, but, Stranger Things, right? So whether or not it seems like it's, I don't know, constantly trying to be an Amblin thing, like I have the same quality that's in those Amblin movies that I feel like a lot of people love, I feel like is here in the show. And that's probably, I mean, obviously that's more important than, hey, that's just like a thing that happened in the Amblin movies or,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue like what you're describing is not something exclusive to Amblin films, which is the audience liking and caring about characters.
It's
Like,
not exclusive to Amblin movies, but I think, like you had led with, hey, Star Wars sometimes doesn't have the best kid, like the best child actor
mm-hmm.
performances. Movies across
Yeah,
the board and TV shows across the board don't always have the most real feeling,
true.
believable feeling, charismatic child actor performances because that's really tough
Mm-hmm.
to do, right? And that's all I'm saying is I think like there's a reason that those Amblin movies work for so many people like throughout the decades, and I think it is because across the board the actors and the performances and the writing of those characters is just great. You know what I mean? And and so anyway, that's all. Like I think they
Mm-hmm.
nailed that part of it, and that's the most important part, of it to nail.
Yeah.
And John Watts, I mean, the Spider-Man movies, right? Like they're not children, they're
Yep.
teenagers, but it's there too. So it's of course
Mm-hmm.
it's not exclusive to Amblin, but I feel like it seems like John Watts and I'm sorry, what's his partner's name? John Watts and Christopher. I want to say Christopher Ford, but that feels like that can't be right.
Ford.
It is
Yeah.
Ford. I know my stuff.
Yeah.
It just feels like they're really zeroed in on that, in their work, and I'm loving that in this show.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think the Spider-Man movies are the most recent Spider-Man movies, I think, are kind of the best comparison to this because those movies, the relationships and performances do feel very natural and authentic, in a way that I feel like something like Super 8, which is a movie I despise, is like just ticking boxes and it feels like, or like Ready Player One or like any of that that's like, hey, remember this, remember this, remember
yeah,
this, and there's like no authenticity to it. It feels very disingenuous. So yeah, I think that's what I was afraid this show was going to be, and it is absolutely not that. And even if you're like, I think if you're a viewer who's like, I actually am fine being a grown up, I don't need entertainment to make me feel like I'm 8 years old again. Like I'm a well adjusted adult. Um and I don't need this kind of
to be
escapism.
to be clear, you're
I
not
think
describing yourself that way, right? You're saying even if you were that person, right?
Yeah, I'm saying to a viewer who's like not desperately grasping onto their
Because I see a
childhood.
Sega Genesis on the floor behind you, so I'm just trying to be clear
Uh-huh.
about.
Hey, those games are still good. I love the
Yeah.
Sega Genesis.
Okay.
But I'm not like I I think even if you're not that person like so desperate for the nostalgia that you can still sit down and watch this show and be like, this is really well made and it's compelling because like there's a really interesting mystery here that is, I feel like I'm just like nonstop dunking on JJ here, but it's not the like mystery box like in your face like twist 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 type of mystery. Like the actual stuff going on with their like home planet is so interesting, and it's like so slowly rolled out that you don't even know it's a mystery until you're like halfway through the second episode, and you're like, huh, that's weird. But it's like not in your face, and it's not what like the whole show is based on.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Okay, well, let's dig into each of these episodes, I think, now that we've both established that we feel like it's really well made and we really like it. So the first episode is called This Could Be a Real Adventure. And there's an opening, it's not a crawl, but there's an opening text kind of, what do we call those now? I don't know what we call that. It's more of the Rogue One or Solo style, right?
Yeah, just some words on a screen.
Yeah. But I thought that was good. I think it's definitely important to kind of establish for people, because one of the things it does is establish for people like, hey, this is set between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. It's after the fall of the Empire, but before the rise of the First Order. Like, all that stuff is important to tell people, I feel like. So that was good. But I'm glad they didn't try to emulate the crawl or something. So, I think it works well. They did it. That was the right choice there. But the show opens up, of course, with a sort of pirate scene, which I think was fun, right? You had these battering rams / tunnels to break into the ship, and lots of, rubber mask pirates, and kind of a sort of exciting kind of opening action sequence. So how did you find that opening kind of portion of the first episode?
Well, okay, I don't I'm not currently listening to any Star Wars podcasts, so I don't know if this has already been talked to death, which it probably has, because I'm sure I'm not the only person to pick up on this, but like it's basically the opening of A New Hope.
Yes. Yes.
Like you have your like pseudo crawl, and then you have like instead of the underbelly of the ship, you have the ship coming in at like an angle, and then you have like, dudes ducking behind cover waiting for like the doors to break, for enemies to like break through. There's
dialogue that's really similar too.
Yeah.
Like if this is they don't think they say consular ship, but basically if this is this kind of ship, then how come, whatever, right? Like it's very much modeled after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
that seems like the kind of thing that might piss you off, Ryan. Did it piss you off a little bit?
Yes. So I'm watching this and I'm like, oh God, I tried to be open-minded. I really tried, and you're doing this? Like, I was really giving you a chance here, show, and this is what you start with? Like, Jesus. Like, but fortunately, I would say it quickly gets over all that, and hooray for people who are really hooting and hollering at the screen and so impressed by that. But it quickly gets over it, and then you start getting like cool, funny, interesting pirate stuff, and which I actually think the pirates are pretty cool and interesting, and the pirate theme throughout this show is a little bit different for Star Wars, because it goes hard on pirate things, and we'll get to Nick Frost's peg leg droid character, but they go hard. But for me, I was just happy to see a cool Wolfman.
Yeah, I love the Wolfman. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll kind of probably talk about this throughout the discussion of the two episodes, but part of, I think, the reason for all the pirate stuff is, obviously that Peter Pan is a major inspiration for this story, I think. And so it just kind of makes sense, right? Like we're gonna do a Star Wars Peter Pan story, and we have space pirates in Star Wars, so it kind of like it lines up pretty well in that regard. I'd actually been thinking a few weeks ago, like we should watch Hook and do an episode on Hook before the show comes out. But I mean, we could still do it, whenever,
I
maybe
just
over
watched
winter
it
break or
last
something.
year.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I just rewatched it. Yeah.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen it since I was a kid. So I'd love to watch it again.
Peaks and valleys in
Yeah.
that movie, but overall, it's pretty awesome.
But a Spielberg Peter Pan movie, and this is Spielberg inspired, so I feel like, yeah. And there's a Hook game on the Super Nintendo. I don't know if it came to Sega Genesis, but there's a Hook game on Super Nintendo. And Genesis? There you go. Yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to mention from this opening sequence, of course, is the Captain Silvo character, who is the one who is kind of leading the charge and breaks into the vault, and then there's only one credit in the vault, and then Captain Silvo, it's a mutiny, right? Is there any world in which the identity of Captain Silvo is meant to still be a mystery or a secret by the end of episode 2, do you think? I mean, I knew who Captain Silvo was while watching that scene for the first time that night. I was very sure who Captain Silvo was, but I think it's evident, right? If you've seen both episodes, it's clear. Or should I dance around this?
So
You know who Captain Silvo is, don't you, Ryan?
I haven't thought about it,
Oh,
honestly,
oh,
because he seemed to get sent out the airlock. I thought, but maybe not.
no, Captain. Okay, here's my theory. Okay, and I don't know if I've ever been as sure of a Star Wars theory as I am of this one, but it's Jod. It's Jude Law. It's Jod the Nawood.
Okay.
Yeah, because I could hear his voice in that opening scene, and I was like, well, that's Jude Law's voice. I was waiting for him to take the helmet off. And then that explains why he's in the brig later on, when they meet him in episode 2, I feel like, right? He's in the brig because they got pissed at him because of that mission or whatever. So somebody does say, like, something about we should throw him out the airlock or whatever, but I think cooler heads prevail. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think Jod's a pirate. He was a pirate of some stature in that group. Maybe not as powerful as the Wolfman guy who rules, but I think he was one of the lead pirates. But you know what? They turned on him, and so he's in that cell. So now that he's working with the kids,
he's also maybe a Jedi.
Well, maybe we'll have to talk about that. Yeah, when we get to that part. But so anyway, from there, it's my favorite. The next kind of big chunk of episode 1 is my favorite aspect of this show and of these 2 episodes. Like the thing I loved the most watching these 2 episodes was the kids in their element, at home, at school, running around their neighborhood. Like that's been my favorite part so far. So I love the Wolfman, and the Port Borgo or whatever is pretty cool, and some of the action stuff is fun. But like what I really love the most is just seeing these kids interact with each other in their environment. And I know opinions vary on this too, but I love Star Wars suburbia. I love Star Wars, bedrooms and kitchens, and taking the bus to school, and I love all that stuff. So I really, really, really loved that whole sequence, or I guess that whole element of the first episode.
So I didn't love the opening with the school bus and the kids riding bikes and all that. I was like, okay, you're just doing the thing. And I thought the parent dynamics with the kids were really good, and I was like, oh, okay, you're telling a story here, and that was good. But all of the window dressing stuff was like, oh, yep, I guess this show is exactly what I thought it was going to be, like just a bunch of nods and references. Um, but it all became more interesting the further we got, because it's like, okay, well, here's Star Wars school, here's Star Wars kitchens, here's Star Wars tri-levels, here's Star Wars lawnmowers, like all this stuff. And you're like, here's a Star Wars cul-de-sac, like all this stuff. And it's like, okay, this is just, referencing these other movies and stuff. But then, and part of me was like, this just, this doesn't feel natural. It, like, doesn't really feel very like Star Wars. Like, why have we never seen any of this stuff before? And then you get to, as the mystery starts to be introduced, you're like, actually, there's something very weird about this planet. Like, all this stuff that we saw in the first 20 minutes of the first episode, like, it's actually not normal. And it's actually not like what you expect from Star Wars, and there's probably a reason why we haven't seen this stuff before. And that's when it started to get like way more interesting for me.
Yeah, we've never been through the Great Barrier or whatever they call it. I think it's called the Great Barrier,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we've never, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I loved it, I think, because it's like, so some of the stuff I wrote down here is like, I mean, yes, the production design is, I feel like I wrote down like it's like equal parts 80s and Star Wars, like it felt Star Wars, but it also felt like they were trying just as much almost to like make it feel like, suburban 1980s suburbia or whatever, which, and knowing your taste and stuff, I can see where maybe that would be not your favorite thing, just because it may feel referencey or whatever. But, like some of the stuff that came from that to me is like, okay, well, Wim is a latchkey kid, right? So if you don't create this like
Mm-hmm.
home environment where we see like what's a Star Wars bedroom, what's a Star Wars kitchen, what's a Star Wars cul-de-sac, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel like the issues that these kids are facing are really relatable, and there's some real like
Mm-hmm.
emotional depth to the stuff that these kids are facing. And so you kind of have to create it. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to feel so 80s or whatever, but you kind of have to create this
Mm-hmm.
like these homes and the schools and the streets and all that for it to feel like, oh yeah, I know what this is like. I know what it's like to be a latchkey kid growing up, or I know what it's like to have all this pressure on you from your parents that you're gonna pick the right
Mm-hmm.
career, or you know what I mean, that kind of stuff. Or like they're basically taking Star Wars SAT and everybody's telling them like this one test is like so important and you better not screw it up. And so like I love that,
Mm-hmm.
because it introduces a world that's in a lot of ways familiar to people who grew up in a certain part of the world at a certain time, that it can then kind of introduce these along with that world, like these issues that are very relatable to what it's like to grow up, in an environment like that. So that's kind of, that's a big part of why I enjoyed it so much. I mean, yeah, when they're on their hover bikes or whatever you call them, their speeder bikes or whatever at night and their flashlights are out, it looks like ET, right? But,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that it looks like ET that excites me so much. It's just like, oh, I've ridden bikes with my friends at night, with flashlights or whatever. You know what I mean? That's the part that I think is pretty good. And Star Wars has been doing that. I mean, in some degree since the first movie, right? Like Luke Skywalker sitting down at the dinner table with his aunt and uncle being like, I want to go to space college. And Uncle Owen
Mm-hmm.
being like, nah, I need you to stay here. Or, we can't afford it. Or, get your head out of the clouds and focus on this farm work or whatever. Like this is stuff that, you know, it comes from the real world. So, um, yeah, I really, I love that stuff. We haven't talked about the characters at all yet. We should maybe talk about the core four there, which
Mm-hmm.
would be Wim and Fern and KB and Neil. Um, Thoughts on any of those characters, Ryan, or all of those, or do you have a favorite? Where are you at with that?
Um, No, I think I don't really like have a favorite or anything. I think, um, with the exception of KB, I think the show does a really good job of introducing the characters' just situations and their family life in in a good way. You have like Win with, you know, his being, like you said, a latchkey kid, and single dad, and uh, who is like really focused, like has a lot of expectations with his job and career. Um, and so he's a bit, you know, not, he has like high expectations, but isn't really, you know, delivering on the supportive front. And then uh, Neil is interesting because it seems like he's kind of ignored because he has a bunch of younger siblings that are like the focus of the family. Um, and then what's the girl's name?
Fern?
Fern. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then like her, again, her mother has like very high expectations for her based on like her position and everything. Um, but you know, she has her own goals and, you know, identity, that is not in line with her mom's vision. And then KB, we don't really know too much about.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think Wim and Fern are facing similar pressures in different ways because mom wants Fern to be like number one in the class, and obviously wants her to you know be very like sort of goal and career focused or whatever you want to say. And then I think like Wim's dad, obviously, kind of similar, but not. I don't. You don't get the feeling that, well, you've got to be number one, you've got to be the best
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. But it's more like you need to you need to you need to do well, but you're not going to get a lot of support from me. And Wim's mother is not there, and I'm assuming she has passed away, but I guess like that has not been made clear exactly. I don't think, right? Um,
Is this the show where divorce is becomes a part of Star Wars?
it could be, it could be, but it feels to me like she's you know like she's died. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, we'll see. I don't know. But yeah, and then I think like Neil is just like, so everything's great for him, and it's like later on when they end up lost and out there, Neil's like, oh my god, I gotta get, my parents are gonna be so worried about me. And obviously Wim's dad is very worried about him too, but it's contrasted. Like Wim gets home to an empty house. Meanwhile, Neil gets home and you see through the window that his parents and his siblings are all, they're hugging each other, and it's just like they're so happy
Mm-hmm.
to be together. And it's everything that Wim does not have in his own home life. So yeah. Um, how about I think Fern is really good. The actor who plays Fern is really good. The character is well written and everything. And I think this is intentional, but it is definitely like has her character has a vibe of I'm trying real hard to be tough and cool or whatever, like has that
Mm-hmm.
sort of like, I mean, she's introduced like being a total badass on that hover bike, and um, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how she develops as a character, because she seems like she's a little bit putting on a persona, right, to convince everyone of how tough and jaded she is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which
So
is like another kind of trope of those 80s films, even
yeah,
like outside of the Amblin stuff. You know, even with like Stand By Me and some of those other ones. There's always that character
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
How'd you feel about the holiday special reference, the homage there, Ryan?
We do not need any more of those. Like we can stop now. Like we get it.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Um,
it's whatever. It's quick. Like good for people who are incredibly impressed and cheering for something like that. But my God, let it go. Like,
okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think, basically what's left of the first episode is they, discover that ship. One highlight for me is the dialogue where they're talking about like claimsies and all that. They find the ship and they're like, claimsies. No, I got claimsies. Like, you had to be there first, or, like all that kind of stuff. I love that. I thought that was really fun.
Extremely kid thing.
That's how kids
Like,
talk.
Kids still do that now. Kids did it when we were kids.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's hard to be too jaded about something like that, because that's like that is literally kids forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and it felt pretty real in that regard. On that regard, I thought.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, they discover this ship. Wim, of course, thinks it's a hidden Jedi temple, which it's definitely not. It's a ship. I haven't seen Close Encounters for a long time, but I think this is heavily Close Encounters inspired, right? Like that ship lifting up there and all that kind of thing. It felt very Close Encounters to me.
Yeah, I just watched Close Encounters 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Rewatched it. It is a somewhat exhausting film
Oh.
to revisit. Yeah, it is like, I don't know, something about like adult characters in some of those like Spielberg and Spielberg adjacent movies from that era are just like, they're just like deeply annoying. I feel the same way about like the parents in Poltergeist, which is, not he didn't direct that movie, but yeah, sorry Craig T. Nelson, but you're like so unlikable. And it's the same thing with like in Close Encounters, you have like this really cool like mystery with the UFOs and stuff, and then like the most annoying adults that are just so unlikable for so long.
I'm not 100% certain of this, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think I've read in the past that Spielberg was pretty heavily involved in Poltergeist, like on set every day, because obviously it's produced by him or whatever, but that can mean a lot of things. But I think it's like maybe almost comparable to George Lucas's involvement in Indiana Jones. It's like, yeah, it's directed by Spielberg, but like it's also a George Lucas movie, right? Like he is, it's not like, he had an idea and then sent Steven off to make it or something. Like he was very involved. And I think, I think Steven Spielberg was pretty involved in Poltergeist. So that may explain that,
Yeah. And it's like, I was thinking this as I was watching, and this is not what you were actually talking about with Close Encounters, but it's really fresh in my mind. Because I had watched Poltergeist around Halloween, and had like the same kind of reaction. And I'm like, did Spielberg like intentionally make the adults unlikable in these movies? And because it's not like overt, but like, I don't know, it's interesting. Or did he just like not really know how to, present adult characters or what? I don't know. But anyways, going back to your original point, the lighting and the fog and the sound design and everything is, yes, very Close Encounters. But I think why that's okay is because spaceships in Close Encounters of the Third Kind are awesome. and
Mm-hmm.
it looks great and sounds great. And it's like, that's what you want when you see spaceships on a screen. So I'm pretty okay with it, with like that being a reference, because it's like, who has done it better since then when you're
Yeah.
trying to convey that? Like,
Right.
it's the best. So, yeah, do that. And that also solves an issue that we've talked about multiple times with multiple Star Wars TV shows where some of the spaceship stuff doesn't look great. And especially spaceships taking off and landing in
Yeah.
some of the Star Wars TV shows. And this looked great. So kudos to them.
Yeah, we haven't talked about the effects really, but I think the effects look very good across the board. I think it does look like Star Wars television, but I think that's okay. Like I saw it in a movie theater and it did not look bad on the big screen, but I wouldn't have probably been fooled into thinking I'm watching the next Star Wars movie. You know what I mean? Like full theatrical release either. It has a television show kind of vibe to it, but I think in a way that works very well for this Star Wars television show. Um, and but watching it in the theater, we did see like quite a few trailers beforehand. It's AMC, so they have to have like 10,000 trailers. So there was quite a few trailers beforehand. They were all Disney things. So, I feel like there weren't as many trailers as an actual AMC movie screening. But anyway, quite a few movies, trailers, a lot of Marvel movie trailers, other stuff too, including some of the Disney live action remake stuff. Like there's a Snow White remake coming out next year, which I don't think I even really knew about that, but we saw the trailer for that. And anyway, long story short, what I'm trying to say here is that watching some of these trailers for superhero movies or for these Disney movies that are like, it's a cartoon, but we're doing it in real life, but there's like most of it's computer animated, like the Jon Favreau, to speak of.
Mufasa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, a lot of that to me just I do not like the way it looks. And then when we got out of this, I said to Owen specifically, I was like, because I think he made a comment about the effects, some of the effects or something, and I was like, I don't know, man. I think one thing you can say for Disney and this, or for Star Wars in the Disney era, ever since 2015, is I love the way they blend, or not even blend, but just make use of puppets and rubber masks and CG characters and model ships and fully CG ships and all that stuff. And every movie does that. Special effects movie does that to an extent. But I love the way in some of this Star Wars, all this Star Wars stuff, they are really happy to have that Wolfman be like a dude in a rubber mask, and there's no doubt, you know what I mean? Like you're looking at that and you're like, that's a rubber mask and that's a guy wearing it, and it's awesome, So I guess that's something I continue to appreciate in Star Wars projects, and I think it works really well here. There is a nice mix of, obviously practical stuff, obviously CG stuff, and then things that are, obviously a combination of the two. I don't know what the deal is with Neil. Neil looks awesome, but I really don't know. I haven't seen like behind the scenes, like how did they do the Neil special effects? I really don't know.
Yeah.
I think he's CG because of the expressiveness of like the facial features and all that. But like,
I
was
get a
there an
CG
actual?
vibe.
What's that?
I get a CG vibe.
But I wonder, like, is it a mask that a character, the actor was wearing on set, and then they kind of augment it with CG, or is it just fully like? Is it Ahmed Best
Full
wearing
Jar
a
Jar.
motion
Yeah.
capture suit, and that's all it is on
That's a good question.
Yeah, I really don't know. But whatever they did, I think it works really well to the point that I'm almost like, is that a mask? And I think it has to be CG, but it looks very tangible. You know what I mean? It looks anyway. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say this is maybe the best looking volume shot Star Wars thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, I don't know. We have to see like more episodes and like what it's going to be like when they get into some like heavy action scenes and stuff. because that's where it can like kind of fall apart, or anytime like speed is part of it. So we'll have to see. But as of right now, like I was pretty impressed by the work being done on the volume. I mean, I think it like I mean, a lot of times looked better than Mando. I would say it certainly looked better than Ahsoka, and I think in some ways it looked better than Acolyte and Obi-Wan at times. I
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Acolyte, you'll still never be able to top like the real time like fight choreography on actual sets that they had, going on there, and I think like Andor is still the bar for like the visuals for Star Wars television, but like this looked really good for like a mostly volume shot show.
Yeah. No, totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that kind of covers the first episode. So we'll talk a little bit about the second episode here, which is called Way, Way Out Past the Barrier. And that is pulled straight from dialogue at one point. I think it's Neil who says we are way, way out past the barrier. And so, yeah, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit. I think the whole Attin mystery is something that is a big part of this episode, so we'll talk about it. But yeah, they're not supposed to go past the barrier. They definitely did, and then obviously go farther from there. But sort of the first kind of the first real thing that happens in this episode is that the droid SM-33 wakes up and shows up shortly after this episode starts. SM-33, I think, could be read as Smee, you know what I mean? And Smee, of course, is a character from Peter Pan, which is interesting because I think Smee is a villain in Peter Pan, but SM-33 so far is a major babyface, I would say, in this episode. But was a pirate, so there's some villainous origin there, sort of. I don't know. But Ryan, you're probably more familiar with Nick Frost and his work, and maybe a bigger fan of Nick Frost than I am. So, how did you feel about this droid SM-33 and Nick Frost's performance of that?
Yeah, no, I'm a massive fan of the Cornetto trilogy. The Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, World's End. Absolutely love Nick Frost in those films and other things I've seen or heard him in after those. Yeah, this character is a lot in it. There's like, I don't know, it's kind of that Star Wars thing where you're like, oh my god, this is so much right now. Like he's like so hardcore pirate, and he has a peg leg and is like just ridiculous, and Frost's performance is so over the top, and you're like, wow, that this is happening, they're doing this. And then I don't know, and I found it very endearing. I really ended up liking this character a lot, and like there's like that initial jarring moment of like, oh, this is like this is full like Pirates of the Caribbean times 10 like in Star Wars happening right now. And then I don't know, then you're like, actually it works somehow. It works. And yeah, I like this character a ton.
Yeah, I like him too, and the peg leg and all that stuff. Like I feel like this show is so lighthearted in a lot of ways, and it's like not afraid to just be kind of silly, and that's like a recipe or a formula that could turn out awful, but it turns out great, I think, so I feel like the show gives you permission with stuff like that to just be like, okay, I don't have to like take this ultra seriously. Like I can just relax and expect like a fun time. And yet I do think there's like some real depth in some of the themes that are being explored and that kind of stuff too. Like it's not shallow. It's just, it's just fun. So I love that.
And I mean, and also like, again, I like this character, and I think it works because they go so hard with it and go all in, and it's not just like a half step. But again, like everything in the show, like what I was saying at the top of the episode, everything is here for a reason, and this character needs to be this character in the way this character is to like be a part to like tell the bigger story. And because it's through this character that the kids discover a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, hey, we're putting this in because it's like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if this was in here, or like, hey, we want to reference whatever. Like, it's no, this character like serves a purpose, and because of who this character is, like that's the way the story is conveyed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, how about did you enjoy the teak ferryman that takes them from their ship to down to Port Borgo, as it's called?
Pretty funny little weird dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved him.
I like him.
I loved him. I loved how, again, not afraid to be silly. Like when he scurries away after he ferries them over there, I'm like, oh my God, this looks like so. I just loved it. It looked like, I don't know how they, animated it or, whatever, but it looked like he was being pulled on a string or something. In the best way. I don't know. I thought it was fun. I don't really care that it's a reference to Teak from like the Ewok, thing, but
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I think there's a character named Teak in the Ewok movies, but then like because this is one of the things that came up earlier in like before the show came out, they were doing interviews and stuff, and they're like, I think I can say that Teak is in the show, and people were like, well, is it Teak or is it a Teak? You know what I mean? And obviously, I don't think it's the same. Like it's just the same species or whatever. But yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
I watched those movies like once in like 2000 or whenever they came out on DVD, and then I was like, okay, I'm good.
I've seen them a few times, but I'm far from an expert, and I hope that's accurate that it's Teak from those movies. I'm pretty sure. I think I got that right. But anyway.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think I mean, the character and like the way he or she is portrayed here is like has a very like Jim Henson vibe of like specifically like Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, just like weird little dudes scurrying around.
Yeah.
And I liked that, and I liked that vibe, but the show didn't seem to be like
yeah,
it wasn't like a focal point or anything.
Yeah, no, it's just a fun little moment.
This is what a little dude like this would do. It's cool.
All right, well, I think there's like there's sort of two big topics left to talk about from this episode. I just kind of looking at my notes, like I have basically two sort of things that I feel like are really important to point out from this episode. And one is to kind of delve into the mystery of Attin, what we think about that, and kind of what information we get in this episode about Attin. So obviously, the bulk of this episode takes place at, I believe it's called Port Borgo. It's this pirate port, whatever, space station thing. And when they get there, they're there to look for, they want directions home, right? They just want to go home. And when they tell people they're from Attin, people are like, yeah, right, okay, whatever, Attin. And so we don't know why that is exactly. Another thing is that their money is not, like, their credits are not normal credits. And I saw that, or I caught this on a second watch. They have Old Republic credits. Their credits are from the Old Republic. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting. And the sort of dancer, I guess, who tries to help the girls is like, whoa, you guys should know.
Outside of the strip club.
Yeah.
Star Wars strip club.
Yeah. She's like, she says to them, the girls say, hey, we're from Attin. And she's like, really? You're a couple of Linderlings from the lost planet of eternal treasure? And so, we know that the planet that they're from is a supposedly the lost planet of eternal treasure. So those are kind of the big things I think we know about the planet, is there, and the fact that there's this great barrier, and you're like, the people that live on Attin seem to be told, like, don't leave the planet, don't go past the great barrier. So I don't really have any theories yet, Ryan. I don't know if you have any theories about what's going on with Attin, or why it seems to be this mystery.
It's Earth.
Oh, I've seen people say that. I hope that's not what it is.
It's Earth 616, which is the MCU.
Oh, okay.
Which is what people want, apparently.
Oh God, no! Like, they want it to actually be the version of Earth from the MCU, so that it's like a Star Wars MCU crossover.
Probably, I don't know. I'm sure there are people who want that.
I don't think there's a lot of things that could make me tap out of the whole Star Wars thing, but that, I feel like that I might be done at that point. I feel like I know I'd be done at that point.
Yeah, no, that would be time to hang it up. For sure. Yeah, no, I think I mean, all of this it's kind of new. Like, I had no familiarity with a Great Barrier in Star Wars before. Mm-hmm. Is that a concept that has existed or been talked about?
Not that I know of. I mean, one thing I didn't mention is that there's a few references to the Great Work in, I think, the first episode, maybe this one too. Like, Fern's mom talks about the Great Work and all that kind of stuff, which seems to be
High Republic.
Yeah, High Republic thing, right? With Lena So and the Great Works and all that. So I don't know if there's going to be some kind of connection there, but like, the credits go back farther than that. They're like Old Republic credits, I will say, I don't have any theory. I will say that I'm pretty rusty on my Peter Pan kind of lore at this point. Like, I haven't read or watched a version of Peter Pan in many, many years at this point. But obviously, like, Peter Pan takes the kids to a different kind of, I don't know where he takes them or whatever, where they go, but it's like a place where you never grow up, right? And it doesn't seem like Attin is a place where you never grow up, but I'm assuming that, this seems so heavily inspired by Peter Pan that, having like this place that's separate from everywhere else, maybe there's some kind of connection there where it's kind of inspired by that element of Peter Pan. That would be sort of my, very vague, not even a guess, but just feeling like that's probably what they're doing, some kind of play on that element of the Peter Pan story.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, or it could be some kind of, like, controlled colony or something, like some experimental colony that someone was running in the Old Republic, High Republic era. Yeah, I really don't know. And that's because there's not really any precedent for this
Yeah.
in Star Wars, and I it could potentially be like a pretty big deal. What is like revealed here, or it could be something smaller that really only affects the characters in this show. Um, it's something that could be very bad if it's handled poorly.
Yeah.
Like the kind of things we were seeing if if all of a sudden we get you know John Watts's Spider-Man swinging in. Uh,
I don't anticipate anything like that. But yes, yeah. I kind of hope it doesn't have like major implications for the overall Star Wars galaxy or whatever. I kind of hope it's just
mhm.
something that's more kind of important to this story, but we'll see,
Yeah.
Um,
So to me, what it like really calls to mind, which I know is like it's not the first mystery in TV or storytelling or anything, but Lost, where there's you know there's this place that um, kind of exists a little bit outside of reality, or it's not a place that can easily be found, sort of thing. And you know maybe it sort of exists out of time, but it's got some like supernatural elements, some scientific things going on with it. That's But like its existence doesn't affect the whole galaxy. It's
mm,
just this kind of like singular place, and that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. Like I
well,
don't think it's going to be like, oh, the Great Barrier allows for like time travel or
yeah.
something, or like world between worlds type stuff.
Well, what you're describing sounds like it would fit pretty well into the Peter Pan kind of archetype or structure or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
that's like what you just described sounds kind of similar to where Peter Pan, like what Neverland is called. I can't
Yeah.
believe I've talked about it like multiple times on this thing and been like,
Mhm.
that place where they go. Like I think it's called Neverland. But time doesn't pass there, right? Or whatever. And yeah, so
Mhm.
it could be, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if I'm being too what's a Linderling, by the way? Is that like a literary reference or something? What's a Linderling? I don't know what that is. I could have Googled that, I guess. But I don't know if that's like a certain type of creature in like fairy tales or what, but I didn't know about that. But anyway, my ears really perked up at the name or the way she described it, the lost planet of eternal treasure. And I maybe am being a little corny here, or maybe trying to read it a little too literally or whatever. But I was thinking like that description of the planet almost could be like a sort of metaphor for these kids. You know what I mean? Because to their parents, they're gone. You know what I mean? They are lost, right? And even with it being a Peter Pan thing, like these children, like childhood, if you want to call it that, or whatever, like, that is a treasure, right? So like these kids being lost to their parents, that's a treasure to, their parents, right? And I don't know how, like, we're going to see them be put in all this danger or whatever. And I think by the end of the show, they're going to return back to that home, right? Back to their home. And, I have a feeling like the treasure in the show is not going to be like, oh, we're going to come across so many credits, we're going to be set for life, right? It's not going to be that kind of treasure, and I think these kids out on their own in the galaxy are, to the people who miss them, are going to be, that treasure, right? So that's I feel like maybe being set up as well.
Yeah. The treasure at the end of the rainbow is family.
Yeah, I mean, but I do think it's going to kind of go that way. Because, like, right away, we're introduced to the parent child relationship is like one where the parent. Well, Wim's dad is not fully. What's the way to phrase this? Not putting as much importance on his relationship with his son as he needs to. Like a heartbreaking moment is Wim being like, "Hey, can you read me a bedtime story?" And he's like, "I have to work, and you're too old for that stuff."
Yeah.
Man, that's brutal. And then like Fern's mom is more present, maybe, although she probably is working a lot too. But also, is like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you because you're number one in your class again, and you have to be number one," or whatever, right? So I just think that's like from minute one of the show is like there's a loss of connection between these parents and these kids, and then I would imagine these parents are gonna be frantic, obviously, knowing that their kids are out there past the Great Barrier, which is not a thing you're supposed to do. And so, yeah, when they are reunited at the end, that should be pretty emotional, as much as it's like, oh, well, family's the great treasure. Like, I mean, yeah, it sounds pretty dumb when you say it out loud, but also that has to be what the show's about, isn't it? I mean,
I do wonder if they are setting up, like that there's going to be a second story with the parents in the same way you see in, like, I don't know, what comes to mind is like It, when Georgie is lost, or I think, isn't that how Stranger Things starts? They're like looking for a kid, and like the parents are looking for a kid or something.
Ryan, Will Byers does disappear early on in the first episode of Stranger Things, yes, and they spend a good chunk of season 1 trying to find him because, of course, he's trapped in the Upside Down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, I think that is like another kind of characteristic of these types of stories. So I don't know if they will focus on the parents or just keep it focused on the kids.
Yeah, it is. It's actually a good point because, like, I guess I've sort of been thinking of it as, it's going to be this whole season where they're going to be out and lost, and the parents are going to be trying to reach them, or they're trying to get back home to their parents. But it's possible they could get back home to their parents, or their parents could find them, or whatever, by the 3rd or 4th episode or something, or the 5th episode or whatever, and that there's a whole other component of the plot that we don't really know about yet, or I'm not guessing about yet, or whatever. So I don't know. I think the more simple and kind of cleaner sort of structure or whatever would be, yeah, they're lost, and they're lost all season, and then in the end they get home. You know what I mean? That seems like the straightforward kind of story, but that might not be what it is. We'll have to see.
It's also possible that the parents know more about what's going on with the planet than the kids do.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And I don't know, what comes to mind here is like Nightmare on Elm Street, where like the parents did like killed the neighborhood parents killed Freddy Krueger, and then he like came back to haunt the kids. But like the parents may know things, and that could be the work that the parents are doing and so obsessed with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it wouldn't exactly be a shock if it turns out the suburbs are a facade that are meant to look like paradise, but underneath it's not. That wouldn't be a new idea. So that seems pretty likely too.
The metaphor for actual suburbs in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, we'll see. But yeah. All right. So, kind of final sort of thing I wanted to sort of talk about is, of course, the end of the episode, which is, well, first off, Urkel shows up. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but Jaleel White was he was the one who noticed that the kids were Like he went and told the Wolfman guy. He's got like a thing over his eye.
Yeah.
That's Jaleel White.
Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, I know. I felt disrespectful writing Urkel in my notes. I was like Urkel with an exclamation point, but
No, the
Jaleel White.
Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true too. Yes, of course.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, so he's the one I think who ends up. I can't remember now if he's the one that ends up. They end up in the brig because of him, or if he. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, they end up in the brig, right? The kids, like, they explore, they talk to people, they try to figure out their way back to Attin. It doesn't happen. They end up caught by the pirates, thrown in the brig. In the brig, they meet Jod Nawood, right? So Jod Nawood is there. He kind of emerges mysteriously, whatever, but hey, I can help you as long as you help me get off this planet or off this, out of this prison and off of this this starship or this space station. And of course, he uses the Force, it appears, to grab that key and unlock that cell. Some of the dialogue there is, and this is pretty heavy-handed, like, I don't know if a Jedi would actually say this. He's like, oh, the distance between us and the key is just an illusion. I mean, it sounds like Obi-Wan or Yoda, but it almost sounds like somebody trying to do an impersonation of an Obi-Wan or Yoda to me. You know what I mean? And then they say, you're a Jedi. And he just says, shh, can you keep a secret? So it's a mystery, Ryan. What do you think about Jod Nawood? Is he a Jedi? Is he not a Jedi? And how do you like seeing old Jude Law in your Star Wars?
I'm always happy when Jude Law shows up in something. I think he's great. Yeah, I think something we didn't actually talk about was Wim's kind of his actual love of the Jedi or interest in the Jedi. You have a scene like when he's introduced, you have the scene where he's basically playing with 3.75-inch Star Wars figures.
Yep.
Which is a lot. And that happens. But then, like, during the career day thing, he's like, I want to do a job where I just, like, help people. And I don't remember what else he says, but he's basically describing being a Jedi without saying being a Jedi.
Yeah.
And then, like, Neil is like, you said you wanted to be a Jedi in front of the class or whatever. He's like, no, I didn't. But then, so then it's like, it's interesting that they actually run into this character who, coincidentally may be a Jedi, which I don't believe. I don't think he's a Jedi.
Yeah, so I think there's two questions. One, is he a Jedi? And I would agree that I don't think he's a Jedi either. And frankly, I've had enough of, here's another Jedi that, we thought it was just Luke and Obi-Wan and Yoda, but, like California Kestis and Ahsoka, I don't need every single show to be like, but there's just one more. There's one more that you didn't know about, right? There's just one left, another one over here. I don't need that. But I think, is he a Force user is a separate question. Does he know how to use the Force a little bit or whatever, right? And I'm leaning towards yes on that. I think he probably, I don't know, maybe there's some elaborate trick, you know what I mean? It could certainly be, but why wait until the kids show up to use a trick to get a key to get you out of the, jail cell or whatever? Although actually, why wait until the kids show up to use the Force to get you out of the jail cell is another great question, right? Like, I'm not really sure how that all works exactly. Were they not
hanging the keys there earlier?
Maybe it's as simple as that. Yeah, maybe they didn't put the keys there until they put the kids in, and then whatever, right? So, or I guess because maybe he's thinking like, well, I don't have a ship, so if I use the Force to get the key to get me out of here, like I'm just walking back out into the lion's den, so I need a plan before I use the Force to, whatever. So. Anyway, I'm going to lean towards probably as a Force user, but I'm sure there's other possible situations. But I think a Force user, I think not a Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if there's a central kind of question being asked by the show of all these characters, or if there's like I guess at least one of the kind of primary themes of the show seems to me to be like, who are you going to be? You know, that's the question being asked in the show. Who are you going to be? So for Wim, who are you going to be? Right. And then I think even with like the parents, well, all the kids, obviously, you know, like it's the first kind of major plot thing for these kids in episode 1 is you have to take this test that's a career assessment test, and it's going to determine who you are going to be, right? And Wim is talking about like, well, we could just sit here on this planet forever, but don't you want to go out and have adventure, you know? And you know, Neil, who are you going to be? Neil's like, no, I don't want. Why would we want to have adventure? Like, we should just stay here and do what, you know what I mean? So anyway, and of the parents, who are you going to be as a father, you know, to Wim's dad? Who are you going to be? Are you going to be this guy who's obsessed with work, or are you going to be someone who actually like puts it aside and focuses on your kids a little bit, you know, or your kid? And then, so I think that plays, you know, like that kind of focus of the storytelling theme or whatever, it makes a lot of sense for a character like Jod to be, I'm a pirate, you know, these kids show up, I'm going to use the Force or whatever, and I'm going to be looking to, you know, take care of myself in this situation, right? But he's going to be with these kids, obviously, as the season progresses, and I think that's a question he'll have to wrestle with as well, you know, because in the moment, I think who he wants to be is guy who takes advantage of this situation to get out of here and then be a pirate and make more money. You know what I mean? Or whatever. But I'm guessing that that will change as the show goes on. And so for him to be somebody who has the Force, but is pretending to be a Jedi, pretending to be a hero, pretending to be someone who helps people, and then by the end of the show, in some way becoming not a Jedi, but somebody who helps people or whatever, or helps these kids, that'll be an arc for him. It's not a particularly unique arc. It's not, you know what I mean? I'm not saying that, but I think it really lines up with what the show wants to the story the show wants to tell, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Could be. One more thing about Wim and his Jedi interest. So, you know, regardless of who's making the movies or what the, you know, if they're a trilogy, one-offs, whatever, you know, I think the consensus, or just I think what we are hoping for, maybe, I guess we don't really have any confirmation either way, is that eventually at some point there is either going to be a movie or multiple movies about Rey training the next, you know, group of Jedi. And so, I mean, we had this conversation 3, 4, 5 years ago about, whenever that story happens, is Rey going to be training Grogu? Like, will Grogu be part of the Jedi Order, the new Jedi Order? And then, so now, like, I always just have in like the back of my mind, like, this new character, that's like kind of has some connection or interest in becoming a Jedi, like, will eventually, like, is that Wim's path to become a Jedi?
Well, to answer that question, I think it very much could be, and that would make a lot of sense, yeah, based on like what we've seen so far. In terms of, is Lucasfilm or Disney looking at this as like, we're seeding this character in Skeleton Crew to then use that character later on to make it all connected and all that kind of stuff? I would say, personally, I kind of hope not. But then also I would say, and this kid is great. Like, the actor is great. It's a great character so far. So that's not an issue. But I personally, I think I would lean more in like wanting to see like this is great because it is like I'm being introduced to this new character. Like it's a new group of characters. They're on an adventure of their own, and I'm sure other characters are going to come in as the show progresses. Like not a lot, maybe, but I'm sure we'll see characters from the Mandalorian universe or whatever, and that's fine. And if Grogu is at the temple with Rey in her movies, like that's fine. But I guess I'm just a little bit averse to the idea of thinking like we're gonna kind of bring in new characters so that we can then keep connecting everything and having it all touch each other. Like I think I would just be more excited for the Rey movie to be like Rey's training a bunch of new Jedi, and we're going to create some interesting and cool characters, and those are who the Jedi are going to be. So that's my first inclination. But then I guess the other thing I want to say is that I don't know how old this actor is that plays Wim. But I'm assuming at this point, they filmed the show a couple of years ago because it was, I think, ready for last winter, and then they pushed it for whatever reason. So, but the kid's maybe 15 now or something at the oldest, I would guess, maybe a little younger than that. And this should be set 20, probably close to 30 years before a Rey movie. So he'd have to be like 40 something, 40 years old. And the kid's not going to be that. So they could have a different actor play him, obviously.
Different actor.
Yeah. But then that already, like right away, I lose a lot of my interest when it's not the same actor, probably, personally. But I don't know. I guess it depends on how the show continues. Maybe by the end of the show, I'm so invested in Wim, and I so desperately want to see him be a Jedi that I would be thrilled to see him, be part of Rey's new Jedi Order. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it all really comes down to execution. Like, it could be a good thing on paper, it could be a bad thing on paper, but it's like, how is it done? It could be, cynical, shared universe stuff, or it could be logical, thoughtful storytelling.
And also what I described wanting is probably not the best business model either. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it probably is in their best interest as a business to be connecting as many of these stories as they can, or, so that every time a person goes to a new Star Wars movie, it's not like I have to start from scratch and how does this all fit together and everything else, So that's part of why they're doing a Rey thing, I think, is because Rey's really popular. Rey's a great character. People know who Rey is. So they know what they're getting if they go to see a Rey movie, and they might want more Rey. You know what I mean? So that makes...
Yeah. It's why they're doing Mando Grogu as a film. But I think...
Well, I think maybe the other reason they're doing Mando and Grogu as a film too, just kind of guessing, is that at a certain point they went, wow, we're spending a lot of money on these Disney Plus shows, and I don't know if we're getting as much money back from it as we could be. So what if we spent that money on a movie, put it out in the movie theater, got a bunch of movie from theatrical sales, and then still put it on Disney Plus, which probably still drives Disney Plus subscriptions, right? So I think that might be another reason too. But yeah.
Oh, sure. But I think there's two sides to that. There's yes, it can, when the MCU was firing on all cylinders and was the hottest thing in the world, people were invested in the connectedness, and they were, people were going to every movie. And then when stuff started to fall apart, when the movies weren't as good, and when they started introducing some of the TV shows that were hit or miss, I think that then people are starting to skip stuff, and then that becomes a barrier to entry when you're like, well, I didn't see the last 5 things, so I'm not going to bother seeing the 6th. And then you just completely divest from it.
Sure.
So then at that point it's no, it is a better business model to just start fresh with each thing.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, really. Which is the better business model, which is the more cynical business model, which is the more thoughtful, creative model. I don't know. I don't think there's a clear answer on that.
Yeah, no, I don't either. But I think more and more, I feel like what may be best for Star Wars is for the most part, like not like 100% like must adhere to this rule, but for the most part to do a group of films every, I want to say every decade, but maybe a little slightly more, quickly than that, but like to have like a set of movies, a trilogy, or maybe it's not a trilogy, but like a group of movies that are one story or a connected story, and then you kind of let it rest for a little bit, and then you come back and you have another big group of another group of movies, and people, it's like, it's not too overwhelming where it's like, 12 movies and it has to be connected to everything else, but it's and I think maybe if they're going to keep doing Star Wars TV shows, then it makes more sense to have some of what you're talking about, like with things all being connected and everything, in TV shows, right? And people can do that, and and maybe they release the odd, Mandalorian Grogu, not odd, but like the not that the movie's odd, but you know what I mean. Every once in a while they do something like Mandalorian Grogu, or but the primary focus of the movies is we're going to have these groups of movies, like somewhat contained stories, but not ad nauseum, not yearly, not constantly, not like, you know what I mean? I think maybe that's what, because basically I think they need to feel special, the movies do, and the more it's like, well, they're constantly connecting to the next one, you know what I mean? As soon as you get done with this one, it's because it's setting up the next one, and there's always going to be more, and it's, you know what I mean? That's, I don't know. I think that makes more sense, but I do think that makes more sense for Marvel. Because think about what comic books are, you know what I mean? Like, there's a million series, they all interact. It's a good formula for superheroes, but I don't think it's the right formula for Star Wars,
Yeah. And that's, I think, kind of the identity crisis Lucasfilm is having right now, because they kind of have, they've dipped a toe in like both waters, kind of, where they like did some self-contained stuff, some like super connected stuff, and I don't know, like I think they're trying to figure out what the path forward is for them.
Right on. Well, the path forward for us, Ryan, is to record another episode, I hope, next week, after the third episode of Skeleton Crew, coming out Tuesday night. Looking forward to that. Clearly, we're going to learn more about Jodna Nawood. The kids are going to set off on their adventure with him, and we don't know much more about it. I'm sure there's been a shot here and there in some of the promotional stuff from, episode 3 or beyond, but I feel like most of what I saw was just from these first 2 premiere episodes. I know some reviewers and, whoever connected people were given screeners of the first 3 episodes of Skeleton Crew, so I'm sure there's more information.
That.
Yeah.
When I was looking at some reviews, and people are saying episode 3 is a banger.
Okay, good.
So
yeah, I mean, I assume it's one of those things where the 3 episodes are sort of an arc where it's like they wanted people to get the whole thing, because it does leave off on a cliffhanger, obviously, and so if it was one of those things where the 3rd episode feels like it's starting up a new story kind of focus, or you know what I mean, going off in a different direction or whatever, then maybe they wouldn't have done 3 at once, but they did. But we didn't see him. I haven't read anything about him. I don't know anything about the 3rd episode. So, but it comes out in about 2 days, and so we'll watch that, and then hopefully, maybe sometime next weekend we'll do another show, huh?
Yeah. One last thing I want to shout out about this show. I somehow, I guess I knew this going into it, but it wasn't top of mind. 2nd episode was directed by David Lowery.
Yeah.
Who directed one of my absolute favorite films in recent memory, The Green Knight.
Yep.
Which is just wild to me. Have you seen that movie?
I haven't.
Oh, you should check it out. It is visually stunning. He was heavily inspired by Coppola's Dracula in the set design and stuff, and you can feel it, and that's one of my all-time favorite movies. And his episode like I had to see his name to be like, oh, that was directed by the dude who directed the Green Knight, because it doesn't, like, I don't know, dude's got range. Um, so yeah, that was just like a fun thing. But in retrospect, episode 2 is a great looking episode. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
cool stuff.
All right, cool. Well, we will be back soon with another episode of the Blockade Runner podcast. Until then, you can reach out to us at blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com. Follow the show on Blue Sky. We're there. Or you can join our Discord, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. So we are talking Skeleton Crew there, but would love to have you join in on the conversation. Ryan, listeners can follow you where?
On Blue Sky at dvdmenus.bsky.social or Standard Issue Gaming defstand480.bsky.social.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll be back soon with another episode of the Blockade Runner podcast.